now here you are, your enemy's squire.
Okay, so for 8 seasons of Game of Thrones, we all agreed on one thing about Theon Greyjoy. He's the traitor. He's the guy who was raised by the Starks, fed at their table, trained with their sons, treated like family. And then the second his real father snapped his fingers, he turned around and took Winterfell, betrayed Robb, killed 2 little boys and mounted their heads on the walls of the home that raised him. And for 8 seasons, we nodded along. Traitor. Simple. Got what was coming to him. But here's the thing that broke my brain when I finally started connecting all of it. What if the word traitor is doing something very specific in this story? What if it's not describing Theon? What if it's hiding him? Welcome back to the couch. Today we're going full rabbit hole on the single most misunderstood character in the entire saga. Not the most hated. Joffrey's got that locked. Misunderstood. Because after way too many hours going back through the books, the show, the writer's commentary, and the actual text of what George R.R. Martin wrote versus what HBO put on screen, I found 3 things that completely rewired how I understand this character. We're talking about a boy who was a prisoner for 10 years and didn't know it. We're talking about a rescue that millions of people cheered for that never actually happened the way you think. And we're talking about a single word Theon repeats to himself in the dark that is, in my opinion, the most devastating piece of writing in all 5 books. None of it is what it looks like on the surface. So let's get into it. I want to start with the thing that reframes everything else. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Theon Greyjoy was a hostage. Now, you know that. It's in the first season. But I don't think we ever actually processed it. Because the show worked very hard to make Winterfell look cosy. Here's the fact. 10 years before the events of the series, Theon was taken hostage by Eddard Stark. And this is the part people skip. He would have been executed had his father Balon displeased King Robert Baratheon. Read that again slowly. From around age 9, Theon was a living insurance policy. A knife held to a boy's throat to keep a father hundreds of miles away in line. A father who didn't particularly care whether he lived or died. And here's where it gets psychologically brutal. The Starks were kind to him. Ned raised him alongside his own sons. Robb became, and I'm quoting the text, more a brother to Theon than any son born of Balon Greyjoy's loins. Sit with the cruelty of that. You are shown warmth by the family that conquered yours. Trained with the swords of the men who killed your brothers. Told, essentially, love us. And by the way, if your father steps out of line, we execute you. That's not a childhood. That's a decade-long hostage negotiation dressed up as a foster home. And the show sells it in one cosy line, because ungrateful traitor is an easier story than child raised in a gilded cell. Theon knew exactly what he was. When Sir Roderick, the man who trained him, calls him a ward of Stark, Theon corrects him.
You know what it's like to be told how lucky you are to be someone's prisoner? To be told how much you owe them?
Hostage and prisoner, I call it. And now watch what starts happening to his name. Because this is the thread that runs under everything, and once you catch it, the whole tragedy snaps into focus. The Starks call him Ward. His own father calls him Greenlander. Soft, Stark-tamed, no longer truly Ironborn. Later, the Boltons will call him something worse. Notice what's missing from that list. Nobody, not the family that raised him, not the family that made him, ever simply calls him Theon. His identity is always something other people assign to him, and a boy who is never allowed to be himself will eventually do something monstrous just to prove he exists. Okay, but hold on. That's the setup, sure. But it doesn't excuse what he did. He still betrayed Robb. He still took Winterfell. He still killed those boys. Understanding why someone does something terrible doesn't make it not terrible. You're right. And I'm not here to tell you Theon is innocent. He's not. Keep that objection in your pocket. Because we're coming back to it. And it gets so much worse than you remember. But first I have to show you the thing HBO changed, because this is where the whole internet has it wrong. Here's the moment everybody remembers as Theon's redemption. Sansa Stark, trapped in Winterfell, married to Ramsay Bolton, being tortured and abused. And Theon, broken, hollowed out, barely a person, finally finds one last spark of courage. He kills Ramsay's lover. He grabs Sansa, and the two of them leap from the walls of Winterfell into the snow. The audience erupted. Finally, Theon did something good. Redemption. Except, that's not in the book. In the actual text, George Martin wrote, Sansa never goes back to Winterfell. She's safe in the Vale. The girl Theon rescues isn't Sansa at all. Her name is Jane Poole, a steward's daughter, forced to pose as Arya Stark and married off to Ramsay. A nobody by the cruel math of Westeros. And that single swap changes the entire meaning of the rescue. In the show, Theon saves a highborn princess he grew up with. A Stark. Emotionally clean. Of course you save the girl you were raised alongside. But the old Theon, cocky, cruel, desperate to matter to the highborn. That Theon wouldn't have crossed the room for a steward's daughter. She has nothing to offer him. No name, no political value. No blood tie. Nothing. He saves her anyway, that's the whole point. And it's the piece HBO cut. The man who spent his entire life clawing to be important finally does the one selfless thing he's ever done. For the most powerless person in the castle. Not for family, not for glory. For a girl the world had thrown away, exactly like it threw him away. And here's the part almost nobody notices. The reason this rescue lands so hard isn't an accident. Theon actually dies twice in these books. Not physically. The physical death comes later. The first death is the one that matters, and Martin buries it in plain sight. Hold that thought, because to see it, you have to notice what Martin keeps doing to his characters. There's a pattern, and Theon is the clearest example of it. Martin strips his men of the one thing that defined them, physically, and then watches who's left standing. Jaime Lannister was the greatest swordsman in the Seven Kingdoms. His entire identity lived in his sword hand. Martin cuts it off, and only then does Jaime start becoming a decent human being. Take away the thing he was proud of, and the person underneath finally gets room to exist. The Hound built his whole self around being a killer, armoured in fear and fire. He gets broken down to nothing. And only then, stripped of the armour, does the wounded boy underneath surface. Now look at Theon. Ramsay takes his fingers, his teeth, his body, his name. Everything Theon ever used to prove he mattered. The swagger, the archery, the look at me. All of it gone. That's the first death. The Theon who needed to be admired. The one who killed 2 children rather than be laughed at. That Theon dies in Ramsay's dungeon. And here's the devastating twist Martin sets up. The empty, ruined thing left behind is the only version of Theon capable of doing something genuinely good. He had to be destroyed to become worth saving. Which means the rescue we just talked about. It isn't Theon's redemption in spite of what Ramsay did. It's redemption because of it. Sit with how bleak that is. And remember it. Because we're about to see the exact crime that Theon had to die to atone for. Now we come back to your objection. The boys. Because I told you it gets worse, and it does. When Theon takes Winterfell, Bran and Rickon Stark escape, and Theon can't find them. And if word gets out that he lost them, that a Greyjoy took the great castle of the north and then let 2 children slip through his fingers, he would be mocked. So he makes a choice that I genuinely believe is the darkest thing any sympathetic character makes in these books. And the reason he gives himself is the whole tragedy in 6 words. Martin has him think, it is better to be feared than laughed at. Not feared than beaten. Not feared than killed. Feared than laughed at. 2 children die because a boy who was mocked his whole life could not survive being mocked one more time. He finds 2 boys the right age. The miller's boys were of an age with Bran and Rickon. Alike in size and colouring. He has them killed. He has their faces flayed off, and their heads dipped in tar so no one can tell the difference. And he mounts them on the walls of Winterfell and tells the world they're the Stark boys. And here's the line from the book that I cannot get out of my head. Theon, looking up at those 2 small heads on the spikes, thinks to himself, people were such fools. If we'd said they were ram's heads, they would have seen horns. That's the villain, right? That's the cold, calculating monster. Case closed. Except Martin doesn't let you off that easy. Because Theon breaks over this. He has nightmares. He dreams he's being chased by giant wolves with the heads of small children, pleading to himself that they're dead. He keeps a shard of melted silver, all that's left of a brooch that belonged to Bran. like a man carrying evidence of his own crime he can't put down. This is the thing the traitor label erases completely. He's not a man who does evil easily. He's a man who does evil desperately, to be respected, to not be laughed at, to finally, for once in his life, matter to somebody. And every time, it costs him a piece of his soul he doesn't get back. The miller's boys were innocents. He knows it. He carries it. And it destroys him long before Ramsay ever gets his hands on him. And then Ramsay does get his hands on him. I'm not going to walk you through the torture. You know the shape of it. What I want to end on is what it produces, because it's the single best piece of writing in Theon's entire story, and it's the key to everything. Ramsay doesn't just hurt Theon, he erases him, takes his name, gives him a new one, Reek, and beats him until Theon believes it. And in the depths of the dungeon, half-starved, missing fingers and teeth, Theon repeats a phrase to himself over and over, to hold on to the only thing he has left, his own name. Except it's not his name anymore. Reek. I'm Reek. It rhymes with weak. Sit with that word choice for a second. Of all the words in the language that rhyme, he reaches for weak, then freak, then meek. His broken mind, trying to reassemble itself, keeps handing him the words he was most afraid of being. His entire life, and now go all the way back to where we started, the thread I told you to watch. His whole life, other people handed Theon his name. Ward, Greenlander, traitor. He never got to pick a single one. And here at the bottom, Ramsay finishes the job the whole world started. He hands Theon one final name, Reek, and this time Theon's own broken mind reaches for the rhyme that fits. Weak, the word he'd been terrified of being since he was 9 years old. Every family he ever had taught him the same lesson. The Greyjoys, you're not ironborn enough. The Starks, you're a hostage, not a son. Ramsay, you're not even a person. Be someone else. Become what we need. Then maybe you'll be worth keeping. That's the real tragedy. And it's bigger than any betrayal. Theon didn't fall because he was evil. He fell because he was never once allowed to just be Theon. And a person who is never allowed to exist will burn down the world to prove that he does. Which is why the truest line in his entire story isn't a plea for his life. Stripped of everything. At the very end, he asks for one thing. The one thing nobody ever let him have. Let me die as Theon, not as Reek. The tragedy was never that Theon betrayed the Starks. It's that every family he ever had taught him the same thing. That he had to become someone else to deserve love. He spent 30 years trying to earn a name. He only got to keep his own for the length of time it took to die. The whole world saw the traitor. Nobody saw the boy. Until now,